feedback.
All right, I'm going to call the Easton Reading Region 9 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. on June 6th. Since we have a few new members, I just want to take a minute and just maybe we'll run around and introduce everybody, just tell you your role. We'll start on the far end. Kelly, you want to?
Hi, I'm Kelly Blessy. I'm a teacher at Reading Elementary School.
I'm Cheryl Graziano on the Region 9 Board of Ed.
I'm Chirag Sadana. I'm on the Reading Board of Ed.
Sarah Lieberger, Region 9 Board of Ed.
Elisa Velasquez, I teach second grade at Samuel Staples.
Devin Weibel, I'm on the Easton Board of Ed.
Stephanie Pearson-Ugal, ER9 Assistant Superintendent.
Michael Brownstein, the assistant principal at Samuel Staples, and also I'll be taking the place of representing the Safe School Climate Committee here at this committee.
John Stinson, Chair, Easton Board of Education.
Beatrix Erickson, parent, Reading.
Chris Parkin, Chair of the Reading Board of Education.
Mike D'Agostino, Region 9.
Great. Our agenda for tonight. Since there's no public in attendance, we're going to skip right over public comment. Number 3, committee member comment.
Just briefly, welcome to new members and excited to get started.
Just want to say it's Pride Month, and there was a Pride event in Easton on June 1st, Pride flag raising, and there was really good representation from our different district leadership within, and then also school leaders, teachers, parents, and community members, and it meant a lot to folks I heard. I was unable to attend, I was actually out of town, but I heard from many, many people just how much it meant to students to see Kim was a rock star. Her kids were like going up and just so excited to see her. So just want to extend a thank you for really being inclusive and showing up for our kids. Great. With that, we'll approval of minutes. So looking at the April 4th, 2022 special meeting minutes. Any changes to the minutes? Okay. Absent of objection, I'll consider the minutes approved by unanimous consent. And move to number 5 on the agenda, climate survey update.
This will be a very brief agenda item. We have closed the parent survey. We have closed the staff survey, and we still have a few students who are being given the opportunity to take the survey because they were either out of school or tied up finishing up standardized testing, which takes most of the month of May. So we expect to close the student surveys this week. And then following that time, the climate committee will spend more time really digging into the more qualitative analysis. We hope to learn better use of pivot tables in our analysis, and we look forward to bringing back more information from the surveys.
Okay, any questions for Stephanie about the climate surveys?
We did leave the parent survey open a little bit longer. We had a lower response from parents, so we sent many more reminders. We responded to a lot of individual parent questions, people having a difficult time with the link process this year. So we do hope that leaving it open enabled some people to participate who might not have been able to.
I do have one question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the one that I sent you, and I've just been giving thought about it. In the question of race, people were able to select more than one. How is that represented? My concern is I just don't want us to have an over-representation of certain, if one person's answering, it should only count as one. But if I have an option where I can select both Black and white, how is that going to be reported? I just don't want to make sure that we're reporting numbers that are higher than they actually are.
Yeah. So it would be possible for us to drill down to the individual response and see if someone selected multiple races and ethnicities, and then look at the responses just connected to that respondent, as opposed to looking at making it appear that there were more than one person responsible for the same sort of set of responses. I don't know if I'm
But-
explaining that in a way.
No, I'm trying to figure out what would trigger the review of that. What would trigger reviewing that individual response if you're able to select more than one ethnicity? I mean, for example, the universe of parents who it went out to, right? My assumption would be when you have the total number of all ethnicities combined, if that exceeds the universe of parents it went to, then that should automatically trigger. And then in which case, how do you decide which ethnicity to report on?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm fully understanding the question, but
So if you send it out to like 200 parents, right? But we have the option of selecting more than one, right? Because I checked off black, white, or all, and I could do that. Now, if at the end of the tabulations, you end up with 300 total responses for all ethnicities, you have a misrepresentation of ethnicity. In which case, how do you then determine, do you discard that response? Or
Yeah.
do you decide which ethnicity to report?
Yeah, no. So I think I understand a little better. So remember that each parent got a unique survey link code.
Right.
So there are responses that are associated with that unique code. So we will know that the one code isn't responsible for 4 different responses. You can tie it back.
This is actually a really
Maybe
common, sort
technical
of
can
simple,
explain.
yeah, it's actually a really common problem in data, sort of data work. And it's all about the way that you tabulate and summarize the data, right?
Right,
Because if you come back and let's say you have a table and it's like, for those responses where this option was checked, here's the row for the answers. And if this option was checked, here's the row for the answer. So if you duplicate a row for each time this box is checked, that would be a bad practice. So we should make sure that we're not doing that.
Right.
There are a couple of different ways, depending on the set of data that we're looking at, how we could summarize that. We could decide to say, let's just look at anyone who checked the box for this option. How did they respond? You could also say, if it's only 1 or 2 people, you might say, for people who only check this option versus people who check these 3 options together. So it kind of depends on the
So
data,
my-
but they shouldn't duplicate the rows.
My question is actually more general than that. As people are looking into communities that they want to move into and things, and I know the district has to report its breakout by ethnicity and things like that. I just want to make sure that we're not over-reporting things that are not actually accurate.
Agreed.
Yeah, so this is not an official reporting at all of the
Okay.
district. So that reporting would be on EdSite or any of the other places that the state uses to report out the official demographics.
But we submit that information to them, do
But
we not?
not on the basis of the climate survey. That's all
Okay.
based on
Right.
what parents provide to us through PowerSchool.
Okay.
So this is not official.
Biracial option or?
Right.
Well, that was what triggered it,
Right.
because I
That's
wanted to
right.
put that for Ileana and I
Right.
couldn't, and it said I could choose both black and white.
There is not.
Right.
We actually chose the options that are available in PowerSchool, and there's not
Mm.
a biracial or multiracial option in PowerSchool.
Mm.
I believe that the Google Forms survey tool that we use, every possible combination is unique and is reported as unique. So if you were to say white and Hispanic, and nobody else did, that would come up as its own response. If that makes sense.
So that would come up as multi, like other, right?
No,
Right,
it
except
would
it-
come
it
up
would
as-
be-
and next you would-
So my point, I guess the
Unique.
question is Ilya gonna pop up as black and as white?
Right.
She would pass, but it would come up as that category of black and white,
And
not
others-
black or white.
other
not two
students who-
responses, but
right.
one.
Got it.
And other students who answered in the same way would be in that same category.
Correct.
Yeah.
So Google creates a category. So for the white and Hispanic, that is its own category. So if another student chose those same 2 ethnicities, they would fall into that category as a count of one student who is multiracial, white
Right.
and Hispanic.
You don't get a count in white and then a separate count
No.
in Hispanic.
Correct.
Yeah, good.
Was there a reason there was no option for other?
It's because it was based on the power school categories. We actually went back and forth quite a bit on developing the categories and even reporting out race and ethnicity in the same category.
Mhm.
And I could have sworn that there was a multiracial option in Power School, but there wasn't.
There was, and there's no, I don't like checking the Asian box, because I don't consider myself Asian, but that was really the only option.
Same
So
thing.
I don't think I actually checked that either.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess to that point, I think the emphasis in that, I'm a member of a biracial family as well, right? So there's that ambiguity that many of us may have. So to the extent that we tabulate the results, I think this is where B is going, to the extent we kind of keep that in mind, that it's gonna get filtered down, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that if there are aggregations of commonalities that we find in the survey, that we can't necessarily say, okay, well, maybe, okay, it's only one, I'll use myself as an example. My daughter responds a certain way, she's half white, half Asian American, right? So, but it's only one response. Do we not do anything with that because it's only one response? Or if there's a similarity between someone else that checks multiple boxes, if you will, is there something actionable
Yeah.
that our districts can do to help everyone understand that,
Yep.
right? So
Right.
to Sharag's point about, it's an excellent point, right? Many Indian Americans don't consider themselves Asian, and a lot of Asian Americans are aggregated in many ethnic groups, as East Asian, Southeast Asian. There's so many, and you know, we don't want to mute the responses or the actions that we would take in that regard.
Yeah, and I think you're actually getting at the conversation that we had at the last meeting, and that's why the first step is to really go through a more qualitative review. Our data set is small enough, so it is really possible for us to look at each individual response. I mean, that's part of the work that I've started to do, just to get a sense of some of the open-ended responses. But once we get into more of then filtering in different ways, then we can take a look at just what you're talking about, Cheryl.
So I would just like to say one more thing on that. This is almost like the one place where the purpose of this work is listening and having an ear, a sensitive ear to certain things. And identity is so crucial. And I can tell you that I know in my family and a lot of other mixed families, having that option of selecting mixed is a powerful statement. And it may not be in Power School, but I encourage you as you look to do things differently. I ended up not answering for my daughter, right? And I skipped that off for my son. My son looks biracial. My daughter looks 100% Caucasian. So we always choose mix, right? For her. My son also, we do mix for him because he's biracial. It's not clicking both. It's having that option that recognizes who you are, not the pieces of you. So I would encourage you to give thought to that. That is, identity in this work and how people, it's a very sensitive subject. So please give thought to that as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And is there a way to improve upon that in Power School in the future?
Right.
Yeah, that's a little bit more challenging because the Power School categories, I don't believe are, well, I'll say we can check into it. I don't know how much we can control, but I can certainly check into it.
And by that, I just
get what
mean
you're saying.
simply other, and they can write it in themselves.
Like a self-described.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's very important.
Yeah, we can definitely look into it.
I just had one other piece of feedback that I saved and I didn't email it to you because I was like, I'll bring it to this meeting when we get there. But there was one question and it said, my child has been the target of hurtful communications through social media. And I want to say it was pretty straightforward. Yes, no. And I was like, I don't know. I would assume that if it was really harmful, hurtful, I would know. Maybe not. And there's a lot of people who live in that maybe not, I think, depending on how much your kid is forthcoming with information, et cetera. So I just would have loved the option to say unsure,
Okay.
I don't know, or something of that nature.
That's
I
really
mean, it was a great thing for me to think about and say, wow, this is a great topic for us to talk about.
So
But it
much.
just hadn't come up yet. And after the last 2 years, it would be an interesting conversation and something I should start a dialogue on
But I think a lot of people probably live like me in that unknown sometimes.
Yeah, particularly if you have adolescents.
Yeah.
And they're not always as forthcoming as you might want. No, this is absolutely helpful feedback. So if there's anything else, please let us know.
I would say I did hear about the gender identity question as well, and just, I think it was only a self-described option,
Mhm.
and that, especially in the middle school where last year there were multiple options, I think you could choose cis, trans, etc. That it felt for some folks that I heard from a few people that it just felt like, hey, wait a second, why aren't the boxes there? And especially for the younger kids, would they know? Like would a teacher accidentally lead a student who is non-binary or questioning to potentially only the gender binary? And so either should we be training, like making sure teachers know how to have that conversation without leading? And I guess, like, why why not have those boxes back? That was gonna say.
Yeah, we also talked about that at length at the elementary level. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that Michael gave us some talking points about what to say for those two questions, which was very helpful. I just read off what you said. However, I still did have questions because I teach little ones and they're not always sure.
Right. You know, we talked about that a lot as a committee
We did.
and particularly those of us who are really elementary educators at heart and knowing young children, the feeling was that if a young child identifies as something other than their cisgender, that child is very aware of it. And that child would know to write something other than boy, girl, male, female.
And that did happen.
in the blank.
Hmm.
And yes, that did happen. And we certainly got a lot of kids actually and parents who wrote all kinds of different responses to that open-ended gender, male, female, boy, girl, letters, you name it.
The other tricky part of that, which isn't all that tricky, but the same way we were saying that every response is unique in Google Forms. So for race, whatever combination I put becomes a unique category. Every spelling, including case sensitivity, is a unique category, and we saw lots of different spellings, ways to spell boy and girl and male and female and any other type of response. So we're going to have to sort through that pretty carefully to figure out how to best use that data.
Just response rate, you said was low on parents. Do you know response rate now year over year, or?
We haven't looked at it like that. I can tell you that at John Reed Middle School in particular, the response rate was lower than in the other 4 schools. The John Reed Middle School students and parents also had a survey that was that the administration time was very close to the climate survey, and there was a lot of overlap between the 2 surveys. And I think that might be a logical reason why the response rate was perhaps lower. But no, we haven't done.
So it doesn't get sent out to the district all at the same time?
The parent survey was sent out to the district. I believe it was sent out all at the same time.
I believe staff and parent survey was sent out.
Yeah, it doesn't
Same
come from my
day.
office. The student survey, I would say, is that there's
It's
the most
slightly
variation because it's generally over the month of March. There were some students at the high school that took it in the last days of April. I mean, May,
Yeah, I think so.
not.
Great. Dr. McKinney, you showed up at a great time. We'd really love for you to somehow magically make that screen work.
Only almost 6'3".
Yeah. I think I resemble that remark.
TV jumps
Did we
in.
try this already? No,
Oh, Steve Bush twice.
just once time.
Twice for all. TV's coming
Yeah. What movie was it?
No, that's the standby. see that.
Inviting you right now to a
To the Zoom. You'll get a Zoom link in a second in your email so that you can share your screen there as well as,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have the presentation.
even if they need the Zoom link, right?
Are we still in committee member comments?
oh no, we moved past that. Yep.
I just got the email, if we can, during public comment, talk about the email that Theo must receive from a parent.
Sure, of course. I saw it. Yeah. Yeah. Wait, are you in the Zoom assessment?
No, I'm on the Zoom. But this is your presentation, right? And you're here.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Chris, could you turn that 15 degrees to the port?
Nice.
Yeah, so we're on YouTube. So you just got the Zoom. Sorry. When he jumps in, yeah.
I made him co-host, so he should be able to share now.
No, you're good. Keep going. Yeah. Keep going. Like slide 7.
All right. So I wanted to take an opportunity to provide an update. At our last meeting, we spent so much time talking about the quantitative analysis of the climate survey, which is just such a very small part of our work. So we thought it was important to spend more time talking about the broader nature of the work, both of the climate committee, but also the district work regarding supporting inclusive experiences in our school. And as we've said, I know on a number of times, our work really has to do with providing a welcoming, inclusive, supportive learning environment for all, for students, staff, and youth. So the facets of our work include a number of different things: professional learning, curriculum, communication and family involvement, and finally, school-sponsored activities, clubs, and programs. And you can see what we're talking about in each one of these areas. So in terms of professional learning, so much of what we need to do has to do with developing a deeper understanding of how to go about providing a safe, inclusive, welcoming environment. And so in this work this year, we have hired the Great Schools Partnership, which is an organization that's an educational organization. We signed a contract with them roughly halfway through the year. As you know, we've had many transitions in our leadership. And so it was very important to be sure that Dr. McKinnon was involved with this selection and that he and I together work with the consultants to really confirm the appropriate focus and then come up with the bullet points of what their work would be. So we're excited about that work. It really started this spring, specific to using this consultant in particular. It included quite a commitment from all three boards. You can see the budget there is $32,300, which amounts to 25 days. We are able to work with this organization this year through the summer and then into next year, which is a really nice thing about our agreement with them. So we're not bound ending at the end of this year because we want to build that momentum and then keep going. So up to this point, we've had, Dr. McKinnon and I have had a number of meetings with our consultant via Zoom. He's also come into our district. He met with the whole administrative council, and then he visited all 5 schools, met with the leadership team, walked around the school. When appropriate, the administrators might have had students help them tour the building, and so they got a flavor for the way that visitors are welcomed into the building and the visual messages as well as the tone in each one of the buildings. That works. In terms of the participants and the roles of professional learning, it includes the leadership teams. And when I say leadership, I'm not just talking about our school administrators. I'm also talking about our climate committees. I'm also talking about content leaders. Our content leaders are charged with doing a lot of our curriculum revision work. So that might be specialists, it could be department chairs, it could be instructional leaders. And we want to engage those individuals specific to their roles with other staff members and also with students. When we say teachers, we're really talking about all certified staff, but certainly in special education as well as general education. Support staff includes a very large group of people. These are critical people in this work. So we're talking about front office staff, which are often the first people that people meet when they come into the building. People that provide them information, that provide them paperwork, that welcome new families into our school. I'm talking about all of our paraeducators, the people who support the students every day in classrooms, and also people in central office. Our central office staff are obviously spend a lot of time on the phone with parents when they have questions, and it's really important that they have professional development and training as well. Our boards of education, very important players in this work. We've talked before about the importance of having Board of Education members involved in professional development so that everyone has some layer of understanding about the initiatives related to diversity and equity. And finally, parents and guardians. Opportunities for parents to participate in meetings, whether it's sponsored by PTA, PTO, or whether it's provided by the school district, but opportunities for parents to come together, hopefully more and more in person, to really have face-to-face conversations about things that are going well and some of the obstacles that prevent us from moving forward. When we talk about professional learning, it's really important that we think about adult learning in the same way that we do for children, which is that one size does not fit all. So it needs to be differentiated. So we need to consider the strengths and needs of our participants. Some of our staff members, parents, board members might have done quite a bit of work in this area, and other people are really starting from the very beginning. So it's important that when we organize professional development activities, that there are introductory activities that might be for everyone, and then there might be some activities that are in a small group or provide a different layer of understanding. We need to consider the roles of the participants, certainly when we plan these activities. And ideally, it's embedded, which means that for those of us who are educators, we know that the least effective professional development is when we're sitting out in an audience and there's someone up here who's sort of talking at them, and then we say, thank you very much, and we'll see you next year. So what would be much more effective is that the professional development is provided perhaps in a large group, but then there's follow-up, and the follow-up would be small group. That might be a grade level team, it could be a content team, it could be based on interest, it could be based on experience. I've had a lot of experience doing this work. I'm not going to have the same needs as someone else would have. And that's the embedded piece of this. We know that good work also includes coaching. We've talked in this committee before about having go-to people at the school. And we're hoping that we can begin to build that structure over the summer and into next year. So I spent a little bit of time looking at the Connecticut State Department of Education and their messages to district related to culturally responsive education. And they have an interesting definition of culture, which has a slightly broader definition than what we might typically think. So based on race, geography, socioeconomic status, experiences, or other unifying denominators. And I thought the other unifying denominators in particular was very important. In reading some of the responses of climate surveys in years past, some people talk about political views as one variable that perhaps make people feel either included or excluded. And they didn't specifically note religion, but that's another area where sometimes people say, I don't think that there are many people who have the same beliefs as I do. Developing these competencies. So it's really important, as you made that excellent point about understanding your identity, and we need to be responsive to that. So we need to make an effort to understand identity. And within the identity, possible biases and prejudices and experiences of privilege and marginalization. So as a district, this isn't something that we're going to plan for a year and check off the box and say that we're done, but it's really the continuous pursuit and really being responsive to the needs of our organization, which includes all the people I mentioned before, not just students, but also staff, families. So let me go back 1 second. So that meaningful connection. So the idea that we want to establish the meaningful connection, but also maintain it. There's an ebb and flow in any relationship. So it's not enough just to say, well, I sent this communication and possibly I sent this communication and I was sure that I made it available in lots of different languages. So I was making an effort to reach out because I know that was the need that we defined. But we need to maintain the relationships. We need to check in. And I'm really grateful for those of you who added more comments about the climate survey, because it's not just enough to say, well, we made the effort. We need to keep soliciting that feedback and input so we can continue to develop the relationship. And finally, that's that point. So here are some of the guiding questions. Some of these come from the state, and I tweaked a few of them, removed a few of them, and thought that these fit our needs. So we want to learn more about the backgrounds of people. And then to integrate those cultures to enhance engagement and consider the outcomes. To gather more information, that's certainly been a part of this work about how to engage students, families, and staff. And then to identify those obstacles that we need to overcome. And finally, to really look at communication, which is another one of the key facets of our work. All the different forms of communication, all the message we send, either intentionally or unintentionally, and to be more aware. And I would say to, we talked about listening, to always be listening to the feedback that we receive. And in terms of curriculum and instruction, understanding the importance of creating and sustaining those environments, fostering an awareness, developing an ability to engage students. And this can be a lot of the work that we're doing with teachers. How do you engage all students? And some of it has to do with the language that we use when we talk to students. Some of it has to do with the resources that we're employing. Are we including read aloud choices that include diverse family structures, diverse identities, so that students have an experience where they see that different identities are normalized with their school experience, and perhaps not just at home or not just when they visit somewhere else. Moving on to communication and involvement. We really need to think very carefully about the written, verbal, and visual messaging. And this covers a lot of areas. These are the first things that came to mind. Our websites, are they accessible? Are they easy to navigate? Making progress, we've got a lot more to make. Are they accurate? Are they dynamic? Our listserv, someone said to me, my assistant actually said to me last week, she was doing some work in our support of English learners, and she said, do we send out our listservs in other languages? And I said, no, we don't. And you know what? I'm not sure that we explain how they can be translated even. So, you know, that's a great list to be making. The signage. What is the visual message that one receives when they enter into a building? Right? How do we send a message that all students, all families, our staff are welcome? You know, is that an icon? Is that a symbol? Is that a set of words? But those are the things that I know as an administrative team, we talked a lot about last summer, and I've seen some noticeable improvements in our schools. But I know that there's always more work to be done. And this is where it's so helpful to get more input from students, from families, from staff. What can we do to improve on this? And this is my part. It's helpful to have a consultant come and visit the school, because the consultant has no idea. And they can walk into the building and they say, this is the first message that struck me. So people walk into Joel Barlow, they see it's not the filling of the veil, right? And that's the message that most people note when they walk in. But others have said, you know, there's this artwork and that really struck me. Those of us who are in the buildings all the time might not even notice it because it's just so much part of what we see every day. Good readings. And this is really where the training for our front office staff comes in. The way that people are greeted and welcomed in, especially in such a security conscious world. We can be safe and secure and still be welcoming, but it does take a very conscious effort. And that's our administrative team has been working on that. So in terms of family involvement, how are we reaching out to parents to know so that they know that their experiences are important to us and that we want to get their feedback? We certainly don't want parents to think that they should wait for that climate survey invitation in late spring before telling us how things are going, good, bad, or indifferent. Right? We need to find ways, I would say, more informal than formal of reaching out so that people can give us more feedback about how to improve what we're doing. Oftentimes we're less conscious of what we live every day. And then also the scheduling. You know, we a lot of times when we begin our planning for the next year, we sort of roll forward with what we've always done. But maybe having, say, gym before school is not the most convenient thing for all families. If the club is only offered after school and you're a middle school student, what happens if you don't have a way to get home? And so then we just excluded a whole group of kids. And are we excluding a whole group of kids possibly whose parents work? And so that just is not possible for them to participate. So we really need to give some thought to how are we engaging all students, and are we unconsciously excluding people because we schedule things in a certain way? I think that's something we need to be more about. And in terms of school-sponsored activities, clubs, and programs, we look at engagement and access. We've had some analysis done of some of our clubs, particularly at the high school level, and really looking at students who participate in different clubs and more formal programs, and being sure that when it's appropriate, that we're not creating obstacles to access that would unfairly keep some kids out of participating in something that they might otherwise. So our next steps, we're really excited about digging into some work this summer. As I said, our consultant will be spending some more time with us. He wants to come back this month And recently, we had a climate committee meeting just last week, and we drafted an invitation that will be sent out either to all staff in some buildings or to climate committees, other leadership groups, inviting teachers who are interested to participate in some work over the summer. And when I say some work, so when we're talking about professional development and having to be differentiated, this would be sort of the core group that becomes more of a leadership group in this work. So these are the teachers that would begin work with the consultant this summer, and I will participate in that work as well, of course, and dig into some existing curriculum. So we're not talking about creating a new curriculum that's a DEI curriculum. We're talking about, let's take a look at some opportunities where we can embed ensured experiences that we designed with the facilitation of the consultant that would bring students in a way that includes diverse representation in our reading selections. And that could vary quite a bit, whether you're talking about an English language arts class or a social studies class or social emotional learning. So at the elementary level and middle school, we use the second step resource, which is part of our health curriculum. And there are some wonderful lessons within second step that could lend themselves as a jumping off point to some of these assured experiences. So it is our intent to create a set of assured experiences per grade that would be sort of highlight lessons, which is not at all to say that this is going to be like an island. This is the only time. But by creating the lessons while receiving the PD, this becomes an embedded professional development experience, right? So this is very different than saying you're going to sit and get professional development, and then next year you're going to take a look at your social studies curriculum and you're going to try and remember everything you learned and you're going to do it. So this way, the consultant can really work with teachers very closely at all three levels to say, here's this existing unit of study, and here's a great opportunity that maybe you haven't considered. And the consultant will work with the teachers to develop those experiences.
Dr. Christina Bell,
Yeah.
is the hope that as teachers are going through that experience, right, that they're learning like strategies or a framework that they can then apply when the consultant is gone next week? Like, I'm now planning lessons with my grade level team, I can apply those strategies more independently.
It's exactly what it is. So the idea is that you're going to develop, and it might be 1 to 3 experiences, but the strategies that I use to develop those experiences, I'm then going to apply to everything else that I do. So that's that it doesn't only live in those experiences. And the other thing this creates is sort of the go-to group in each building that we've talked about before. So this is a group that would continue over the course of next year. In our email invitation last week, we made it clear that you're committing to do this work over the summer, but then also you would continue to be part of a leadership group moving forward, where these teachers would receive another layer of professional development, creating that cluster of staff in each building that would be more knowledgeable about how to create experiences for students and families that are more inclusive with the curriculum fit. So we've talked about having people in every building who, that you're not just limited to the administration, right? That if a staff member is struggling with an issue, I think that the term that was used last year so artfully was when cultures collide. And how to navigate those situations in a way that isn't just, I'm going to go to the administration because I think there's been policy violation, but more, I'm struggling with how to deal with this as a teacher, and I'd like some advice. And I know that my colleague Kelly has done a lot of work in this area. So that's what it's meant to be, very collaborative. Yeah.
So I guess the volunteer solution could identify multiple different professional staff we have across all 5 buildings, right? So this is completely hypothetical.
Yeah.
Say 11th grade social studies teacher says, yeah, I'm in, and 3rd grade, math,
Math and everything else.
right? And then kindergarten, like, so how would those individuals, I mean, they only have the scope of influence, or access to data at their levels per se, right? So how would then that potentially help other teachers at a broader level over time? Like, is that, or is it now, if depending on who volunteers, that's the only level that's going to get this benefit of the people?
Yeah, so let me clarify. So the work that I'm talking about doing over the summer is really for teachers, because we're talking about the curriculum. The invitation will include more staff members. So if there is a member of the front office staff that really wants to participate in professional development, it's more around how can I do a better job of the way that we communicate with families, then they would absolutely be welcome to be part of this leadership group, but they wouldn't participate in summer curriculum work. The summer curriculum work also will not be in one pre-K through 12 group. It would be organized by level.
Okay.
Right, so that, because that if, I think it would be less efficient to try and really provide hands-on support and facilitation to teachers if the consultant is working with a large group.
I was just wondering, I love the idea of the small group. I'm just also wondering like what the plans are for having it trickle down to the whole staff.
Yeah.
Because sometimes that gets a little challenging.
So that's the next step. So that has to do with planning professional development for next year. And as we get together as an administrative team this summer, this is one of the things that we talk about. What are the needs of all? And then what are the needs in small groups? So one of the areas that we talked about as an example is the way that we orient new teachers, new staff members to our district, and how, frankly, we need more time with new teachers to give them not just more of a curriculum orientation, but information about the most important initiatives that we have going in the district. So that would be an example of a small group. We'll then talk about, with the differentiation piece of PD, what should be for all, and then what should be based on need or role. Talked about improving communications and the different areas that are included in that. And then how we welcome new families, and this has certainly been on my mind as well. We welcomed so many new families into the 3 districts, especially in the last couple of years, and especially in an environment that is that was remote for a good period of time and is so security conscious. We want to think about how we are engaging our new families, both in terms of, do they know that we welcome each individual? And I think about our English learners in some ways in particular, because I think that that's probably one of the more challenging experiences if a young student just does not speak a word of English, and how hard that might be for the student, but also for the parents who are trying to become engaged in a new community. Certainly for all new families, how are the different ways that we engage them and really show them that we're happy with them? And then finally, analysis of the climate survey responses, and that work also informs our professional development and also our climate goals, as well as the building goals.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
Being on the climate committee at JRMS and speaking to other people who are in different climate committees throughout the district, it seems that each climate committee operates independently of each other in terms of what the conversations they're having and things like that. But it would seem to me as a district, we need, it would be in our best interest to sort of like have a common goal or things that all of the committees are working towards.
Yeah, we do, actually. We share them at the first meeting we had this year. So we have district level climate goals, and then in addition to that, we have school goals. So Wendy Michaels, he chairs the St. Staples Committee. So we have the broader district goals, and then each building climate committee. I mean, you know, because you sit on the climate committee, right? You meet, you talk about the data.
But even when you look at the fact that this committee only meets 4 times a year now, and my understanding was a lot of this work would also move down to the climate committees, and the climate committees right now are operating at about 4 times a year. Even the amount of time we meet, things like that, to have more structure to that, to ensure that the work is done. Frankly, I don't think that 4 times a year is enough for us to really get into the meat of some of the issues that need to be dealt with, not just this committee, but also the climate committees. But it just seems the perception out there is that they are school specific. So if it is supposed to be, that has not been communicated to those of us on those committees.
Well, that's good to know. The specific element is that the work of each school's climate committee should be responsive to the strengths and needs in that school. I do know that there were
Understood.
committees paused for a while when our COVID numbers were higher in the middle of the year. And I know that there maybe weren't as many meetings as we might have liked. We also, this year, different from years past, made a concerted effort to have set membership. So in some buildings, it was more informal, and people would kind of drop in. And I know that we talked about how to engage, depending on the level, students, staff, and parents, and then the timing of that, whether it needed to occur during the day, in some cases before school or after school. But I hear what you're saying. So if that connection between district and school isn't clear, then we need to make it.
It could be as simple as, as when we meet, these are the goals that we're looking at now, district-wise, and this is how it translates to what the work we're doing here in this school. That way, it communicates the bridge between the two.
Yeah.
But right now, that's not clearly communicated.
I have something I think I have something to add about what you just said, the climate committee frequency that you meet, this task force and what you're talking about. But I'm gonna, I just wanted to make a note that I've got something to add, but I'll wait a little bit longer.
I think I'm just about ready.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Michael, do you have anything else to add? Just as someone
No, I
else?
think that's very helpful feedback. I would agree that we have the district goals and then we have the school level goals because every school has a slightly different climate and culture. And we're looking at the data for our individual schools at the student level, not in terms of the parent survey, but at the student level. So we're responding to our students' experience in a given year.
And I actually asked that because I think that knowledge, I know in my committee, the parents who are in it take it very seriously, the work that we're doing. But a lot of times we'll see a lack of understanding as to why is this what we're focusing on, right? And I think we would gladly come into allyship if there's like a bigger picture for us to understand, and it would probably make our time much more productive if we had that understanding.
I would also add, we've always had parents on our school climate committee, but I can only speak for St. Louis Staples. We had one parent for a few years, and then when that parent no longer had children at the school, another parent took their place for a few years. This year, the district committee made the decision we need to expand parent involvement. And again, schools did it slightly differently. At Samuel Staples, we put out an open invitation. And we actually had many parents reply, come to the few meetings that we've had where time is always the scarcest resource. And I agree with that. And it takes time to really dig into one survey, let alone 3 different surveys. And then come up with the goals. So I feel like that parent committee doing that work for the first year this year has kind of had to evolve. What is the role? What is their role as opposed to the staff and teacher committee, and how can we work together and support each other and complement each other? And that also takes time.
Whereas at John Reed, like we hit the ground running with it, and there's probably about maybe 5 of us parents on there. And so you speak to my point that it looks different in all the different schools.
How do you measure how
I think that's a great question. I think there are probably multiple ways that we should be measuring it. I don't want to limit our measurement only to the climate survey. I don't think our participation rate, honestly, is high enough for it to be an accurate measurement. So I think we need to, and one of the things that this group has tried to figure out is how do we create a forum for people to have an honest conversation about something that might be uncomfortable at times. And so I imagine some of the work of this committee might be, how can we do that outreach to find out, is it making a difference? Is the work that the district is doing in this area, is it making a difference for families, for kids? And I think the district can handle the staff part of things, but I think it's a really valid question to wonder if we're getting all of the feedback and input that might be from parents. So I think people have talked about, when we first started up, is there a way to have a community conversation about the ways that people are feel welcome or not welcome? And I think we struggled in particular with just the remote experience that we were in for so long. But now that we're in person, I'm hoping that there's a willingness, not just on the part of the district, but also the parent organizations, and maybe even more broadly within the town, to have some conversations about this.
Is that, I guess, when you think about community conversations, is that something that consultant has had experience with in other districts, just in terms of, hey, here are some things that have worked, here's some things that maybe didn't work? Just, I do get nervous about a task force or committee leading that charge without knowledge or understanding. Like, it's, there's ways to do it, there's ways probably not to do it. So like, who does that, or like, how is it done? I know we had talked at some point about focus groups, again, led more by the district with input coming to the committee, just to better understand.
So I guess I was thinking that this group would be having the discussion about it, not the charge of leading it.
Right, yeah, just making sure that that was good.
Yeah, he has, actually. He has participated in some community conversations in other districts that he describes as being similar to our own.
Great.
That would be helpful to have to Sherrod's point about measurements and Devin's point about timing. Would be helpful then for perhaps this task force to focus on both, right? Because then that would be the appropriate level where information could be shared in this public forum that we have to follow because we're three legal entities, if you will, but yet still allow the districts and the schools to continue to work the longer term work, which is really where the value is. But if we perhaps calendarize or agree to a loose timetable with the construct of the quarterly meetings or whatever mechanism, right, or some type of, again, aggregation reporting mechanism, again, without creating too much work for the administration, more of, but forcing us to have this forum and to use these public meetings as a touch point for, okay, are we on task, right? Or how is it going? And if nothing else, that forum, and to invite, I'm trying to learn from the mistakes that we made from the last go around, where unfortunately, for right or wrong, the work was politicized and it shouldn't be. And so I think if we can somehow use this group, which is public, to create that net, if you will, so that people know that there is a potentially safe environment in which they can actually talk about some of these issues. And we can't necessarily do it in the construct of this task force, but perhaps can introduce, more private, comfortable groups that would not have any quorum of any public servants that people can come to, at least if nothing else, to share their experiences of the state. That there's no obligation for anybody to do anything per se, but just so that people can feel heard as we do the real longer term substantive work.
Yeah, I mean, I want to speak to the safety piece for a moment. Certainly in my work with teachers over many years, I mean, you need to establish a relationship that's trusting in order for people to feel comfortable being vulnerable and being honest in their representation of their needs, and also being able to be open so that people don't feel the need to be defensive. And so the reporting is hard because so much of this work is we're going to begin it, but then we need to create these safe spaces so that I'm not coming out and saying, well, 75% of our teachers have a lot of growing to do. And I would not say that. But I want everyone, right, not just the district employees, but everyone who's involved in any of these conversations to feel safe, and also we have the privacy of not feeling like it's being broadcast.
So you said two words that are really near and dear to my heart, and especially this week in particular. I noticed on several of the sides you had family engagement, and we're talking about safety, right? Now, those of you who've been in this task force since day one know that one of the things that I've always said is I'm not just on here to give my input, but I'm on here to protect my children. One thing that this week is a real nervous point for me, and I'm going to reach out to the principal, is that, JRMS is having Multicultural Week. And I will say that 99.9% of the time, I have no problems with what's going on and educationally. But the one experience that I did have was a few years ago when JRMS did that. JRMS tackled social justice, and the intention was 100% very well intended. Their hearts were in the right place. The execution was horrible, to the point where almost every Black family was called, the principal, myself included, and said, my child will not be participating in this. Please don't do this, and don't teach the other kids this, right? It was horrible. So we're talking about family engagement. For me, as a person of color, when special programs like that are put, I would love to just get a preview of what my son's going to be given. So I at least have an option to opt him out. If it's not, because let's face it, there aren't very many people, there are very few people of color in a teaching staff, right? But none. So while you may want to do something good, I need to make sure that what you do does not hurt my child. So right now, I am going to reach out to Megan, but if I can't see it ahead, I can promise you I'm keeping him home Friday, right? I don't know what's happening. And I mean, the images, I kept the file, the images showed like a white baby riding a mammy and slapping her like a horse. They were going to show that to middle schoolers. And among other things that were really bad. So perhaps part of the family engagement, and I'm not saying for all of curriculum, but when special things like that are planned, just have a panel of parents that you can just send it, just heads up. Is there anything here that looks, I'm not trying to be a teacher. I'm just saying, like, is there anything here? The only reason I saw it was because we were distance learning. So the teacher sent everything ahead of time. I just keep thinking, thank God for COVID. No, but like if it hadn't been for that circumstance, my son would have walked into that. And would somebody try to write him later on? Because it's middle schoolers. They're not ready to handle that. And I actually showed it to a lot of educators that I know. They're like, that's not even an image. That's an image you would do at a graduate level course, not to middle schoolers. So I'm very nervous about, and I am going to reach out, but as I'm bringing it here, you talk about family engagement. This is one way to get a dialogue in, a non-confrontational dialogue in with parents from a different perspective. Because if it happens afterwards, it will probably almost always will be confrontational. But this is a way to build a relationship and to ensure that we don't end up in the news for like a bad thing. I mean, seriously, you see it all the time. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I mean, I think it makes great sense when you're planning a larger event that you anticipate could be one that would evoke emotions or experiences for some, based on a particular identity. I think that's a great thing. Frankly, I can see that being brought to the climate committee with an invitation, perhaps in a weekly newsletter, to say, we're going to be having this conversation in our climate committee. If you'd like to participate, come on.
But just to see what the kids are going to be given ahead of time.
I will say that it's very difficult for teachers all the time. And the example you gave is extreme and clear, but it's difficult for teachers on a more daily basis to anticipate and then to provide that opportunity for parents. But honestly, this is the reason why I would like to see us move away from this one day in the year is going to be this special event, or this is the week that we're going to celebrate X, or this is the month that we're going to focus on X. And even saying that, I think those words have been misunderstood by some. I think Stephanie then thinks you shouldn't be celebrating Black History Month or something like that, which is so not the case. It's just, why should we be singling out a single month to do this when I think that in some cases, there's a greater chance that someone will fumble with all good intentions because they're trying to engage people in an experience that is powerful. And sometimes powerful in the mind of the designer is not the same experience for those who have a certain day.
I will say, I'm hopeful during encouraging educators to look at curricula from many lenses and giving them a framework or thoughtful questions to ask as they design units of study back into like lessons of study, where I'm thinking about the experience of not only myself or people who look like me or have my experience, but the experiences of my students, their families, our community members, the outside community. And when I feel uncomfortable about something, I should go with the gut and talk to my school leader, talk to the teacher group, the leader group.
Yeah, my
And
colleague.
yeah,
for example,
implicit bias is really, it's like an awful thing. It like, as a white woman who's the norm, whatever that norm is, like your normal implicit bias, like you have to force yourself to overcome that. You have to have a framework to force yourself to ask really hard questions that are uncomfortable, and then ask other people questions, right? Like reach out. I think that's why the community conversations, but also opening up the conversation is really important, and finding ways to do that where people feel comfortable sharing, because not everybody's going to be as strong to come and share or call the principal or do those things. Just like, okay, at school, I just have to, so it's like, how do we make that invitation happen?
Yeah, and as I said, the example you gave was very obvious, but I'm guessing there are other experiences that kids have from time to time where the parent just says, oh, it's a blip, we're gonna move on. It wasn't easy, but we're gonna move on. And we want to be sure that parents have the message that, we do want your feedback, right? And we're not saying that we can be perfect and they're never going to be blunders, but we want to hear from students and from parents when something doesn't sit right, or when we can have a better understanding of the identities of our families.
And my request was,
Go ahead.
my request was not for day-to-day curriculum. It was specifically for things like this special event. Day-to-day curriculum, I look at what what my son is reading. It's those special events. That's like, so far I have not had reason to find fault with the curriculum, and I do look. So it's these day-to-day, these special events is what I'm talking about. Because those are the ones that, like you said, even if there is a fumble in the day-to-day, it's not going to be as magnified as that. That's my concern.
Well, just a couple things. These conversations are really important because as Stephanie's presenting and you're asking questions, I think one of the questions was, what is our purpose? That's such an important question because B, you were talking about our curriculum committees meet 4 times a year. The task force meets 4 times a year. How are we going to get the type of work done that we need to get done if we only meeting that frequently? And I was thinking of the hammer and the nail problem, right? If the focus of your committee is examining data, then the committee becomes the hammer, and every discussion you have is the nail, right? And so we're never going to committee our way to meaningful change in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's simply not going to happen. And if we meet 4 times a year, school-based committees, even if we took our 4 committee meetings and we try to make them more connected with our district committees, and even if the focus of our DEI task force, it's just that's not really where it's going to happen. So I am thinking about the 25 days that Dr. Pearson Hugo talked about with the consultant, and the commitment of spending $32,000 in this work. We're not spending $32,000 in anything associated with improving academic achievement. If you look at the fact that our math scores have declined by 10 points on Smarter Balance, up to 40 points on the SATs, you know, we're obviously putting money towards different programs, but that's a significant investment that we're spending in this work. And I think that we really need to be clear about how we're going to use those funds. So when Stephanie and I met with Jose, who was from the Great Partnership, and we said 25 days, what is that going to look like? Well, I personally feel that we should be spending 10% of our time on data, shrinking it a lot more. We should be spending 50% of our time on building meaningful, assured experiences that we can actually start teaching our students. And those experiences and those strategies are things like stereotypes, evaluating differences, perspective taking, empathy, discussions, questions, belonging, identity, looking at bias and prejudice. And as we're building those experiences, as we're investing 50% or 12.5 days of the consultant's time on building those experiences, we're also going to be spending 40% of our time on implementing those experiences and training our teachers in what culturally responsive education looks like. That's 10 days. Because we're not just teaching these experiences at different grade levels. As we're teaching the experiences, that in itself becomes professional development. Because if I show you how to have a conversation about differences, I'm also giving you the tools to do that yourself at another time. So 10%, 50%, 40%, that's how I think we should be focusing on the 25 days of professional development. And what research says is that if you make these experiences and strategies routine, then you can actually move beyond phase one. Phase one is the strategies and the experiences. Phase two is the meaningful curriculum. And then phase three is the community conversations, the focus groups, and leading to acceptance, right? So think about phase one, phase two, phase three. Think about the 10%, 50%, and the 40%. And we start by building these experiences and these strategies. Because unfortunately, you know, you're thinking this week about the culturally responsive, about the culturally responsive education that we're about to do. I remember just a couple of years ago, I had a second-year teacher, and they didn't know how to teach about Black History Month. So they pulled a lesson from National Geographic because they thought that was a reputable resource. And the lesson was a simulation about the Underground Railroad. And they asked students to pretend to be slaves. And the teacher had no idea they didn't know how hurtful that was to some kids because they haven't had the training. They haven't been given the experiences. And, go back to step one. I can tell you that our teachers are scared to make mistakes. And they're scared to make mistakes because of the political thing that happened here and happened across the country. That's happening across the country right now. And I'll say one more thing. Safety and security should be the most important thing in our schools, but it also should be the least important thing. We should get to the point where we're moving beyond safety and start focusing on learning. We're not there, and not just in education, but in security in terms of the shooting in Texas right now. It should be the most important thing, right? Our building should be the safest thing. But is that where we should be spending our time? No, we should be spending our time on teaching and learning. So I think Stephanie's presentation is excellent. And we just need to clearly define phase one, phase two, phase three, how we're spending the 25 days, because the 4 days a year isn't enough. I totally agree with you, but the 25 days is enough if we budget our time effectively. So that's kind of really vital.
And the nice thing with that many days is that there can be a little bit of an ebb and flow, right? Because until we dig into the work, the needs won't be completely known, because we're not going to get a good understanding of our teacher needs by giving our teachers a survey. The consultant will be working very closely with a small set of people, and then more broadly with our staff, and by having those conversations, we're going to gain a better awareness. And remember, this is not starting from the beginning. This is work that we have been doing for many years. This is definitely a more concerted effort, supported very specifically in our budget for this year and carrying into next year, but the work is not blank.
Can I add on? I hear from our teachers that there is some fear about making a mistake, but I hear even more that they want to do this work, but they want to do it well. And they want to make sure that they have all the tools that they, and the comfort that they can have to do it well.
Yeah. So we need to build these experiences for them. Right? And say we're going to tackle differences and empathy and perspective taking in this particular area of our curriculum or in this particular grade. We're going to evaluate bias and prejudice maybe towards the end of elementary school and middle school. We're going to do it in a developmentally appropriate way, and we'll get to race and differences and gender and all the things we need to get to through these experiences, right? Because experiences become strategies, become routine, become embedded.
Right, so that you're not thinking about it, right? Because anytime you think about when you're learning a new skill, about anything you've learned to do, say a new technology skill that you're trying to master, it's very mechanical and procedural in the beginning. And you're going to go back and look at those directions. You're going to continue to ask for help. And then as you begin to live it, it becomes embedded in your daily work, then it does become second nature.
I think I remember when we met with Jose, I think last month, he was talking about how having teachers all have like the same lingo or same type of dialogue when tackling conversations like that. And I think that's really important too, because like we don't want to make mistakes, but if we know that everybody in the district has the same type of language and is talking about things in the same way, that might be helpful.
And B, I just want to say, on behalf of the district, I'm sorry that you're in this position.
Yeah.
And I feel terrible that that's even on your mind this week.
Yep.
So, and you please reach out to the principal, but if you need our help, just let us know.
I would appreciate it. But I also will say, I understand that the teachers are afraid to make mistakes, but I will tell you that my own personal experience is they err to the credit of the district. My son, like I said, this was the only experience that we've had, but it was big enough that it left me nervous about those types of events. But for the most part, the teachers are very caring, and there you can see that their intention is very positive, and I'm very encouraged by that.
Oh. Any other questions? Well, thank you for jumping in. And it does help. You know, I'm standing here, I'm not taking notes, but I'm confident that other people are taking notes.
Nice.
That's being recorded. So we had some additions to the agenda. This was a request to really think about, we last meeting talked about the charge, and I think just thinking through kind of the scope of the charge, and even before we go into that direction of reopening the charge, or as you know, the charge is quite broad. It covers literally everything everything, period. And so one of the asks was just thinking through, as members of the committee, what are some of the goals or your main goal for this committee for this school year coming up?
Is this Susan's?
Yes.
Yes, okay. You have that?
She didn't send it to me.
Oh, okay, sorry. The question that she was asking, since she couldn't be here tonight, is she listed short-term goals as well as long-term goals. She was talking about a DEI consultant to help determine the best ways to foster an inclusive environment, which I think we kind of just talked about.
Yes.
Her husband's ill, so she couldn't join us today. And then the other item that she wanted us to discuss was LGBTQ plus professional development district-wide, including elementary schools. She says 21% of Gen Zers that have reached adulthood identify as LGBTQ plus, and this number is likely to grow. Faculty and staff should know how to support and provide a welcoming and inclusive environment for this growing number of students. I'll add to that, I was there on June 1st to support her for the Easton flag ceremony. And one thing, she and I have talked about this, it's, we are allies in the struggle for equality, but my struggle is different from her struggle, but we try to support each other. And one thing that's really struck out, I was standing there with my kids, and there were some kids that came along and they looked like they were about middle school age, right? Or early middle school age. And one of the kids said, "This is the coolest thing ever because everybody here is safe for us." And it really struck my heart that these kids recognize that. And they, so many of them were talking about their safety, feeling safe in their space. And it just made me realize all the different places where at such a young age, they are not feeling safe. And I did send Susan an email about a text about it. I said, it really hit home for me, part of what your struggle. Like, I don't walk her struggle, but I got a glimpse into it and it was heart-wrenching. And then the other thing she wrote was long-term goals, actively recruit diverse staff on an ongoing basis.
So just being, I think, on the Board of Education in Easton, obviously one of our main functions, as I've learned, is budget. And I think part of this committee's role and really goal should be making sure that we hold space for conversations around the resource need at our 5 buildings across our 3 districts for professional development, for building curriculum, for making sure that our schools have those resources so that, you know, the $32,000 isn't like, again, that's a significant spend. It's a necessary spend. 25 days goes like that, especially across 5 buildings and 3 different districts when you're talking about differentiating PD support. And I think we also have to look at, you know, our library resources, our curriculum resources, our like classroom-based resources. And I think understanding that need financially is a significant part so that we're able to make those recommendations. And as board members go back to our boards and advocate that those funds are allocated in our distinct budget lines.
I have a question.
Sure.
When we're talking about resources and budget, where's $32,000? Is that in the central office budget?
The $32,000 is in my section of the budget in the 330 account, and the 32,000 is divided not equally, but in 3. So it's in this year's budget. So specifically to Region 9, it's $5,000. It's a much greater amount to the other 2 school districts.
Right. Well, that's because Region 9 for the 45,000 last year, right? So, but no, that's fine. I think it would be easier, and to Devin's point, to be able to advocate for if it was more clear, like, because we're seeing it in little bits in each budget, and now we're seeing it together as it's grouped. You know, I think it's harder for us to kind of. I think it would be easier if we had a greater awareness of what was going on in its entirety to be able to advocate for that.
I think Mike just advocated for regionalizing the districts.
I didn't.
But I'd be curious.
No, I didn't.
I'd be curious to hear what Dr. McKinnon's goals are for this group and how we could be supportive of his vision for this group.
Well, kind of how I described and this is just me scratching on paper as we're meeting, but the idea of moving from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and if our goal or purpose is to have community-wide conversations and focus groups where everyone feels safe and everyone feels accepted, no matter where they come from, their culture, their race, their preferences. That will be the goal, and how we get there could be, again, the phase one, the strategies and experiences. Phase two, moving into meaningful curriculum change, embedding everything in our curriculum, so it's not kind of short experiences on the side, but really embedded in everything that we do that moves to that. So it would be supporting that work. We have 25 days allocated to the consultant, then us having frequent conversations about us building those experiences and what that framework looks like, and describing how we're going to implement those experiences and what training we're going to offer along the way. I think that would be a goal. Like, what is our purpose? How do we systematically get there? Whether it's those 3 phases or other 3 phases, and how we spend our time. And please, if we can spend less time talking about data, it is important. Like I said, 10%, 50%, 40%. That's just my recommendation. But maybe as a committee, we discussed that as a group. Do you agree that we should be spending 10% of our resources towards data, 50% of our time towards building experiences, and 40% of our time implementing training? Because we only have so much time.
So I agree with that overall vision, and I definitely agree with differences at any level should not be for a certain time period. I completely agree with these observations, not at that level, but certainly like, well, it's great to have Pride Month or Asian American Heritage Month or African American Month. It shouldn't be relegated, at least in context, as a topic. And I love the strategy at the overall level. But that said, that takes time. So in the meantime, microaggressions happen. Microaggressions happen to our students, and that's our focus. So I think what I would suggest to make these goals more manageable is, I agree with you. The data is just a mechanism to measure or try to measure something that is very difficult to measure, especially if it manifests itself in the form of a microaggression for our students. So we have to have 2 tracks, if you will. One that is, and this is definitely a long-term ongoing, like anything that you get educated in, a long-term thing that happens in cycles over time. So I think we definitely should focus on that. But perhaps to Devin and Mike, Chris's point about budget, right? So we have already, the 3 districts have already approved the $32,000 in the different pools of money. So let's focus on the strategy that you're proposing, assuming there's consensus. And that's our focus for the year. But come January, the boards are going to start going through the budgets again. It's my expectation that we're going to build on the work that we're doing now. And so what is that ask? And what we can do as board members is to help justify that our taxpayers are going to get a return on their investment. And the return on their investment is, sure, it's monetary or quantitative in terms of you get a better SAT score, because if you feel safe, you're going to do better on that test. You're not going to be worried that somebody's going to bully you because, and you're not going to want to go to school. If we can create that climate, that will help. But it's a long term, and it has to be something that we get our community support to do, knowing that it's got the demographics that it does. So, and that's where the community conversations come in. So perhaps at the end of this year, I'm making this up, or at some future point, once we as 3 districts have that curriculum, the baseline of that built out, let's test it. Let's test it through the climate committees in that safe environment without the spotlight of the board members, if you will. And then that can create that environment of safety where people can say, you know what, I did not like that XYZ lesson that was shared that month. While it had the best of intent, it made this group feel worse by having it than not having anything at all. And so I think that's kind of what we have to do. But then again, individual board member, my expectation is that there's going to be a larger ask come budget time. And how do we make sure that our students and our community members say, oh yeah, this is effective. So I think that's probably the way to do it. I'm speaking completely conceptually, but I think that's a way to calendarize it and to put time limits around it.
And I would just add to Cheryl, I think here, we spend a lot of time talking about this, and even if it's 4 times a year or 6 times a year, it's still more times a year than many of our fellow board members. And if there are ways, and we've talked about this in the past, where folks can have an understanding. I think, the last 2 years, this work got under a microscope, got politicized and got misunderstood in many ways. And those misunderstandings can lead to potentially things not being funded or people pushing back on work that at the heart of it is really good instruction that leads to better academic results for our kids and also leads to better outcomes socially, emotionally, and mentally. And so how can we support this work by providing opportunities for board members to also receive some professional learning in this space, just around the basics of what is DEI, why is it important, and how does it impact kids in a positive way? And like, what does that look like? Again, to Mike's point, how are those 25 days being spent? Like, what are we getting out of that? And like, how will it lead to positive impact? And then why should we continue to invest? What else? Like, this work doesn't stop because you never get it 100% right. It's about making progress over time and going slow to go fast.
I think the answer to that question is, what are your goals? I think one of the questions is to develop one of our outcomes should be develop goals.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because we're talking about budget and we're talking about January and getting ready.
Yeah.
I think the board would support this work if we said, here is our purpose, and this is the return on investment, and this is why it's great for kids and it's good for everybody. And this is the nuts and bolts and how it would work.
Yeah.
I think one of our goals should be creative goals.
Well, and I do think, to Mike's point a little bit, that you can't necessarily let this work get lost in the curriculum writing lines of the budget for a number of reasons. One is it gets lost from the conversation. 2, the curriculum writing lines are whipping boys for let's just take $10,000 here or $5,000 there every single year. And what you don't want to happen is for this to be the work that gets sort of carved out of that. And thirdly, if there's a long-term intent to say that there will be a point in time where these ideas are interwoven through everything that we do. And so every piece of curriculum writing will be through this lens, regardless. Then there's a point in time where you're going to be able to flip from spending $40,000 on DEI and $20,000 on pure curriculum to the other way until you sort of merge the two. And so it almost makes sense from a budget building perspective to say, here is the traditional curriculum line, here is the DEI line. And there are pros and cons to that because it'll attract different kinds of attention. But if we're trying to be intentional about this and tell a story about this, that's a way to do it.
Yeah, and if you can back that up with here's the benefits of this, and here are our specific goals that we're going after, then I think you can create a group of advocates here who can faithfully represent this to the boards and help everyone to understand the value. I would love it. I love the sort of 10%, 50%, 40%. I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, Dr. McKinnon, but would you have sample goals that you would put against the 10%? Here's what I would suggest as a possible goal for what we do in the metrics bucket. Here's a possible goal for the 50% bucket. Here's a possible goal for the 40% bucket that can help our sort of, this group start to get moving on the more specific goals that we might target.
And then here's how it fits into phase 1.
Yeah.
Phase 1 we can accomplish over X amount of time. So immediately when you were talking about the phases, I was like, is phase 1 over the course of 1 year?
Right.
How long does phase 1 last?
That's exactly what I was thinking too.
And then after you do the phase, that's where you start to look at some metrics because you're like, okay, what did we accomplish? Now let's look at the data. I mean, so once we align that with the goals, I think it starts to make sense.
Data is super attractive because it's a number, you can attach something to it, you can say, we're doing well or we're not doing well, whereas so much is qualitative that it's harder to unpack. But I think to Dr. McKinnon's point, that's where a lot of the real work gets done here.
So as far as the buckets, I agree with the buckets, Dr. McKinnon, that you also put in. The thing with the data is what you'll get out of the data for that 10% is it will tell you what areas you need for professional development and training. That will be a huge chunk. That's part of the conversations that's not taking place with the families directly, but this is the way that you're getting that information from the families. But for me, as long as that information, I've been frustrated not being able to see it, but if we're using that information and it's spitting out into the other buckets and it's really being looked at, for example, Cheryl, you mentioned the microaggressions, right? And I know in the past, I've said the things when cultures bump up against each other, right? That's where that data comes in to help. When you take the knowledge that's in the input that's in the data and you apply it to the professional development of the staff to create a more welcoming culture. Like for example, the microaggressions, our personal experience, I know it's not everyone's experience, is the microaggressions, yes, flat out aggressions.
Aggressive aggression.
No, aggressive aggression, right? Not so much. But the microaggressions is where you start to chip away at a student's confidence about feeling safe in their space, right? But so part of that training, the reason I honestly believe that most of the microaggressions that happen, especially if it's happening student to teacher, is because that teacher doesn't realize why that's considered a microaggression, right? So to me, that's part of the training that needs to get done. Like, why would someone who doesn't look like you not be comfortable with either that word or that phrase, or you asking them to move when you didn't ask the white student to move? Why are these things happening? To make it, that's how you get a much more culturally aware environment. And those are the types of things that make for a safe school. But right now, outside of that data though, where are you learning about these microaggressions unless and until you get an angry parent? And at that point, you're having a whole different conversation that you didn't need to have if we had a report to start with. I'm that person, I'll say, listen, I wasn't offended, but you may want to train someone on this because this didn't go to, and I'll walk away and completely forget about it. Because if I tell you I'm not offended, I'm not offended. But we're not having those conversations. The only place you're having those conversations is in that research data. So to me, take that, you consider that your 10%, but please, I beg of you, use it to distribute among the others. That will make for a much safer environment.
It's not linear, it's not like it's
Right.
10%, 50,
Yeah.
it's a pie. It's a circle.
And it all mixes in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I have, for this question, develop goals for the DEI committee, like goals for our goals. Right? Kind of a framework for the 10%, 50%, and 40%. A timeline for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and framework and metrics. They're the three big things that I have. That I wrote actually.
I would also, there's a resource piece that was probably kind of, because it's so federated, like he was talking about how there's the curriculum committee, the climate committee, but they don't know it's showing up goals for this committee. There's also an inclusion committee as part of PTA at Reading, that's part of, and it's very distributed, and they have a budget, they can do things, but they don't have the same, they probably have the same goals, but it's not outlined or clear. So when we're developing goals sort of as a district, and how to sort of filter that down to all these different committees so that everybody's marching towards the same place.
Yeah.
Because there's resources probably being wasted because we're doing assembly on this thing as opposed to something that ties back to the goal for the whole district.
And there are times when here's the tempo and there's an opportunity to sort of capitalize on the same tempo. And there are times when you need to be doing the syncopated rhythm, or you guys are doing your own thing over here. And like, so yeah, but you can't orchestrate it without actually knowing what's going on. Like there's very little sort of cross operational awareness.
That's a great point. And to that, I think it would be really important for us to get people in this room and on this committee who are part of the PTA and have those funds for that speaker, that experience, whatever, that are part of the ELF and other nonprofits that raise money. And so they need to know what we need so they can bring it back to those boards who then donate the funds. We just Launch the Easton Prevention Council. Easton here is here to help. And so we have grant funding. We don't know how to spend it, right? So all of these community groups.
Right.
I'll talk to you about the money
Well-
later. All these community groups have funds that they want to use and they want to use them in meaningful ways.
Yeah.
So when we start talking about all this, right, we need all these people at the table. But I want to bring it back to what you had said. We need people with lived experience who we are talking to, students who we are talking to who say, that's nice, but this is actually what we really need. Because all of us can talk all we want about what we think needs to happen. We really need to hear from the students and the parents and the families who experience it on a daily basis, whether it's microaggressions or curricula type stuff, one sheets that get sent home, et cetera, right?
Perhaps to that point, right? All of us have resources. We're all active in our communities, right? And that's why we're here. So we do have our own network, right? To derive from it, releasing money and health. And there are so many organizations that are willing to fund this or help or both. And so we have a big enough network that we can all individually say, hey, I'm going to call my neighbor who's in organization XYZ. They'll totally support additional training session or whatever we say it would be in plan, phase 2. And so we can still individually reach out to our networks to try to create that connective tissue in terms of once we know what a task force we're going, we could be spokespeople for, hey, we had this meeting last week. This is what we're doing. Hey, organization XYZ, let's get involved. Is this something you're willing to support?
Well,
We pitched it out to fund wherever the taxpayers don't want to fund because it's outside the budget here. And another I think point of communication is to then again create that forum to have, or even we could take the data without collecting new data. The concern I have is with the aggregation of data. We talked about this before, right? So we have, let's just call it, we have 2,000 kids across all 5 schools. By default, the minority groups or affinity groups are going to be marginalized just because it's in the numbers, right? We're going to have a predominant characteristic in all 5 buildings. And I don't want that individualized lived experience to get muted, but I understand we have limited time and resources. That said, for those groups, perhaps there could be a safe way to reach out to those students and say, hey, so-and-so is here for you, or we're developing this. Would this work for you to mute the marginalized experience that you're recording up because your parent to be's point was complaining? Like, we don't want it to get to that. But if we know that there are individual students that feel marginalized in any way, or maybe they don't, what do you think of this experience? Because they'll know, they'll tell you if, oh my God, it's going to make it worse. So-and-so is going to call me even more of a such and such if we have that lesson in that day. I mean, that's, you can't get any better than that actual student, if you will, to tell you if that's going to be effective.
Or a parent.
Or a parent.
Or a
right?
parent.
If you're talking about little
But
kids,
as a parent, I would prefer to give my input to prevent my son from experiencing it. That's my number 1 goal.
Yeah, prevent the trauma, not treat it.
Right.
Yeah.
When I think around just framework and metrics, I think we've gotten very siloed into one set of data.
Yeah.
The climate data as the only set of data that
Yep.
gives us metrics in which we can understand progress. But as educators, if you're in classrooms, you're talking to
other data.
educators, you're talking to parents. I think there's kids. You're talking to kids all the time, right? Kids are all about feedback. And I think sometimes we forget that is part of the feedback loop and should be metrics that we are figuring out in some way how to, quantify qualitative information to make decisions. It's not, and just like, how do you report back without, again, creating any kind of fear? I think all of our teachers, at least the ones I've met, work really hard to create safe spaces and want to do better, and every day are working at that. So, but trying to make sure that we're not saying, oh, just this one metric in this one survey on this one day, right?
The other part about the survey, and I always focus mostly on the student survey, for better or worse, but because it's what I do, I guess. But often the surveys, and we've made improvements over the years, which I think have helped to get more of the qualitative. We've added more open-ended questions, which can be very helpful. There are times though where some of the questions, give you information, but it doesn't give you reasons. And I'll give you an example. Every year, the bathrooms turn out to be one of the places that kids report are the unsafe space in school. But we don't know why they're saying that it's unsafe. Are they saying it's what? And I've
Are we
heard,
asking why?
well, and I've heard, and we did ask this year for an open-ended question.
Okay.
If you indicated that a place is unsafe, can you give more information? And kids did. Before we did that, we theorized it could be, and based on conversations with kids, many kids were saying it feels unsafe because they're afraid there's going to be a fire drill, a lockdown drill when they're in the bathroom, and that makes it unsafe. Or is it that kids are having bathroom parties and that makes it feel unsafe? Or is it microaggressions where I don't know, I'm not able to use the bathroom for the gender that I'm identifying? And you can't always get all of that nuance, unfortunately, through the data.
So you have the data that tells you they think that's it, but you just don't even know how to address it.
If there's another piece missing,
Just
dig
right.
a little deeper for the nuance.
Exactly.
The only other thing I would add is, in terms of getting feedback from people and input from people is, and it's wonderful we have 2 teachers on this committee here, but, and it sounds like we're getting ready to put together a teacher leadership team. It might be helpful to bring that team in to hear from them. What is it that teachers are saying that they need? What are they scared of? What are their hopes for doing this better, and how can we help them?
Just one quick thing to add on to something that Devin was saying about the metrics, about like there's already sort of existing data that we can interrogate that doesn't, it's like there's no survey necessary, there's no, sort of any extra work done. Like where are our teachers being hired from? Where, like, if we care about hiring and creating a representative workforce for our communities and making sure that sort of we're sort of recruiting from diverse populations, like how are we doing that? Like, so where are we going out and recruiting? Where have we historically hired from? Like this is data that exists. That's, it's an Excel spreadsheet that could be run and would tell us a lot, and it helps to inform those next set of decisions. And that's just one example. There's probably dozens of examples of, hey, what if we looked at this, or what if we looked at that? And it doesn't require any surveys. It doesn't require anything but just sort of thinking creatively about how we can interrogate the data we already have.
And strictly from a parent perspective, I use the example of, if I said before, I could say to you, so-and-so did something, this situation happened, and I wasn't offended, but this person may need some kind of training. I'm actually serious about that question because I've had a situation happen. I'm not gonna say which child, and I can tell you that I know it was not intentional, but it's definitely an area that needs training. Like where this work requires sensitivity and safety on all parties. It wasn't egregious enough for me to feel that I could go and say something without getting that person in trouble, but that person could use some training. So like, what's my safe ground as a parent here? And how do I go about doing that? I know one thing, if I were to do it with someone who hasn't had that training, they would be extremely defensive and fearful for this, and the conversation gets shut down, right? So that doesn't help. Who could I go to say and not have it held against that person? Because I'm telling you, it's not something to write them up about or however it is, but this is an area before you run into a big crisis with somebody else. So like,
It's awareness building.
Right. So like, who would I have that conversation with and be assured of the confidence and that person would be given the assistance without jeopardizing their job? I mean, it's a real
That's a real
question.
question. Well, it should be the administrator in any building. I mean, I think you can trust your administrators to handle sensitive issues without it being reporting because we're expecting that you're going to tell me what action is going to happen, but we just want you to know.
Right, and so it would be
And I
like,
would say if a parent does not feel comfortable or has made an effort at the building level and perhaps not gotten the response that makes the parent feel heard, I mean, that's where you get sort of the ladder, and then I would recommend calling central office. Right, and asking to speak to me or Dr. McKinnon, but I do believe at the school level, the administrative team, and in particular, the Safe School Climate Specialist is the person who's most involved with that work. And that should be a go-to person for parents in those situations where you're not looking to report, you're trying to raise awareness.
then we might want to make that clear to the
Yeah,
community.
so then that goes back to what we were talking about before about communication, and that we're not talking about a reporting form, we're talking about the go-to person.
It's a good point, because there are a number of new individuals at the schools, so they may just not know, right? Or I know that there's a way to provide feedback through the school website. I honestly don't know how many people use it per year. Do parents provide feedback? Anonymous feedback, are the students doing it regularly? Would it benefit us to do something a little bit more old school, like an anonymous box outside, I don't know, near your office building or something, you know, or I don't know, do people not want their name or their IP addresses attached to it? Right, and even with the surveys, I think some people still have hesitancy. So would it benefit us to have some sort of old school method that is still anonymous feedback, like a Dropbox or something?
Right, and I'm no wilting flower, but I hesitate because I'm like, I don't want to look like I'm that person when I'm trying to say, listen, I'm okay, but this could be something potential down the road for you guys if you don't deal with this. But I'm hesitant to do it.
And at the same time, if you sort of delivering that message, which is like, hey, there's a growth opportunity here.
Right.
For it not to be met with defensiveness, or for it not to be met with, I mean, in some cases, it's, okay, you're talking about a recess aide who handled the situation in not the best way, and they need some training. Well, we've got, a gap of recess aides that is insane. Like, we can't hold on to anybody. And oh, by the way, this is on fire right now. And this is, and it's like, well, how urgent would you say it is that they get this training? It's like, it's vitally urgent that they get it so they don't make this mistake in increasingly high stakes situations. But it's, how do we deliver that in a way where people understand the gravity of that situation, while at the same time not saying, okay, so we need to fire this person? Like, no, it's really important, but it can be solved in a reasonable way.
Sophie, I want to add something else to my response to your question, that depending on the people involved, I would hope that sometimes someone feels comfortable enough to say directly to the other person involved, I don't know that you meant to communicate in this way with me, but I just want to share with you the way I heard it, the way I received it. And I know that that's not always possible, but I can tell you sometimes when I've had conversations with colleagues, not necessarily about this kind of topic, but when someone has said, the way I received this is this, and I'm not sure that was your intent. And I would like to believe that our professionals would be receptive.
Except, and this is the reality of it, right? I mean, I've worked for 25 years. I understand how to do that type of conversation. Except when I, as a Black woman, go to someone white in this environment, heightened cauldron that we're in, and I talk about something on a racial level, the wall comes down.
Sure.
And they are defensive. They're afraid to make the conversation gets lost, which is why for me, if it's something along those lines, I'd like to have someone safe who I feel comfortable with to say, listen, this is a situation. I need to know that you're going to handle it in a diplomatic way. I don't even necessarily want them to know that I had the conversation with you, but this person needs a little bit more training. And not have it blow up in that teacher's face because they stumbled, because our cultures rubbed against each other. I need for them we need to have a safe environment for them to recover from that mistake, because it's something, they didn't mean, that training can take care of. and that I'm not perceiving as an outright hostility. But right now, we live in a contentious environment that I think most teachers would be very nervous if I had that conversation with them. And then that would just defeats the purpose of what I'm trying to do.
Or could just feel embarrassed.
Right.
Right. And embarrassed can.
And then now they're embarrassed and now they have to deal with my child.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
It comes back to the training and I think these community conversations. And I think what's important to your point is we're doing these conversations for teachers and for students and for their benefit. The outside community, parents included, are a large part of that and may not have access to the same training, right? So I think we do need to open up the community conversations and perhaps some form of the training, whether it's speakers, small sessions and rooms like this where you can be vulnerable, which is really hard for people. If any of you, which I'm sure many of you have done this at a corporate level, it's really uncomfortable in that situation too. But then we're talking about parents who have never even had that opportunity.
Yep.
So it's hard. I think we have to have honest, vulnerable, courageous, brave, and safe conversations where people can come together, and maybe we need to just set the tone that everyone in this room is allowed to fail and stumble together. We have to be forgiving, we have to be gracious, like there needs to be some policies, you know, to start the conversation so that way everyone feels like they're able to show up and be okay to fail. And
I think one of the things that has been hard, and you hit on it, and Cheryl hit on it a little earlier, is in a corporate space, you're doing this in a private way, right? With your colleagues for sure, but it's not broadcast over YouTube. And then, so when you make a mistake, it's not something that I think there's been concern in the past that people will clip it and use it against you. So trying to think about how those community conversations happen in a way that allow for people to be vulnerable without being broadcast, I think is potentially important. And just to come back, I think around these really important comments, you brought this up, I think in the past, is I do think that there's potentially a process for that kind of conversation to happen with the committee, the safe school representative, but I'm not sure if people know. You can find it on the website, because I have found it, but that isn't always clear. So to your point around communication earlier and links on the website and finding the information, sometimes it's just really hard to find who to go to have that, whether it's
And saying it once, at the beginning of the year is probably not enough.
right, because it's only like drinking from a fire hose when the school year starts, right? And even if you already have I have 2 kids in the system, and I'm still so just where do you find that information? Who's my first line of defense, right? If I have a question, right? Is it the superintendent? Probably not. Is it the teacher? Is it, so that's helpful, I think, as well. Great. Okay, so we're going to move into, unless anybody has closing points, I know it's late, no Monday. Just committee membership update. Again, this is our membership overview. We're making some progress. So if we go to the next slide, Dr. McKinnon. Board members, we are currently a check. However, we are losing an Easton board member, so we will have to replace after our next meeting. So that will be a sad face X. But we will replace that person soon, because I kept faith in John in doing that. A student from each school. This is a place where we currently do not have student representatives from any school. So there was turnover when the school year ended, students graduated, moved in. This is a place where we have opportunity. So I'll show the application that we put together that we agreed upon last time that we'll be sending out to solicit student reps from each of the schools. Certified staff members. Good news, we're making progress here. We have some folks who have joined. But again, I think this may be an area where we may want to, I think it's in the charge as one person, but encourage staff potentially to join us because our input is so valuable. And then 2 members of each community. Again,
Question. Why only, if we're talking about this as an opportunity for us to hear from the community, why only 2 members from each community?
that's a great question. If you go back to the charge, that just happens to be what was put in the charge. So I think the idea would be that 2 sat on the committee, but then folks would join from the committee. We've talked about revisiting the charge, but that's just happens to be what's defined in the charge. And I wasn't here when the charge was created, so I'm not 100% sure.
If I recall the conversation correctly, it was because at this point, the committee reached 20, which
Oh.
was already getting to be a large number to manage. But we can obviously discuss rebalancing it, but that's the genesis of that, I believe.
Remember, a committee is not a focus group. Right? And a committee is, doesn't get us to where we want to get to, which is large community conversations and acceptance. A committee is just a working group.
And so if you go to the next slide, we talked about the application process, sharing this inclusion statement. So if you go to the next slide, there is a set of questions in a what is this, Google form that where we're going to send out and ask just some identifying questions. Basically, which role are you applying for? Are you a student? Are you a teacher? Are you a parent? They will then ask, we're just asking them to define diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it applies to our school communities, and then look at our inclusion statement, diversity and inclusion statement that we actually drafted and approved as tri-boards in 2020 at some point, I think April 2020. And then once we have those, I'll share those with the group, and folks can provide their input.
July 2020.
Thank you. July. Any thoughts, questions, concerns?
So we're looking to form the membership that will be in place for next year.
For next school year. So this will happen in the interim between this meeting, which we're in June, for the next meeting. So this, I'll work with Stephanie and the building leaders to get this information out, and then also solicit members of the community and students.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about the timing about getting students to join in June. I'm starting to check out for the summer, but we can talk more about the best way to reach out and invite students.
Yeah, the hard part is, so even if we ask them early next year, it's just making sure that they're in the, like where we lost students was that
Right.
school change.
Was the school change, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I just have a comment, not a question, but it kind of dovetails a little bit with the public comment that a few of us, but not all of us, received. So I think what I would recommend in the interim, while we're applying or soliciting applications for new members to replace the ones that have rolled off for whatever reason, perhaps just to update the roster as it currently stands, and then clearly communicate that based on whatever timeline is defined, which is fully appropriate, we might use the whole summer or whatever the time frame is to get new applications for new members. That way it's clear that we have X amount of positions open, all of which are the students. And then that way, you know, and then we can perhaps consider communicating back to the public.
Yep. I think that list, the roster on the website, has been out of date on the students for a very long time.
Yeah.
But you and I can look through that. Yeah. Right. We'll move to public comment. Great. Seeing none. We'll move to board member, or sorry, committee member comment.
I want to say thank you to the leadership here that we've seen from obviously from administrators and members of the buildings, and thank you so much to the teachers who are here at 9 o'clock after a long day of taking care of our kids and all that, and certainly from our sort of membership of this committee, from our boards. But I really want to shout out to be like, thank you for being here and adding your voice to this and grounding us in the realities that are facing our kids and how important it is that we stay focused on that. You're making our communities so much better And this is going to have such a long tail that, 20 years from now, I think we are going to be seen as just such a sort of community of the sort of embracing of diversity. And I think we're going to see a really meaningful impact from the work that we're doing now. And the fact that it's being grounded in that reality is so important to its success. So thank you.
So just, when do you think that list will be cleared up?
So I will email Stephanie tomorrow and work on it. I apologize. I thought it had been updated, so we will go through it tomorrow and make those changes. Right, any further committee comment? If none, move to adjournment. I see motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? We are adjourned at
Thanks, Ed.
9:10. Thank you.